والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع ذنوبنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبا القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم وهو الأصدق القائلين وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اتل ما أوحي إليك من الكتاب وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. The 10th day of Shawwal, give or take. And I thought this is an opportunity to think back to the gifts of Eid and the gifts of Ramadan. You know, time moves in strange ways depending on our state. And at least for me, that sense of Ramadan is going away quickly. It disappears before we know it. That flavor, that distinct flavor of the feast of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it was an opportunity for me to revive for myself and refresh myself, just thinking back, you know, to Eid and the Ramadan, which it was a culmination of. Now, in many ways, it was a landmark Eid. In many ways, after so many years living in Europe and in the UK, it was a widely unified celebration of Eid. And one of the things that we could take from this, you know, this gift, it was a gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no doubt. But one of the things that we could take from this is just to re-examine what we have been considering the crises of Muslims over these years that have gone by. For so long, we've been debating about the different practices of Muslims. This is a crisis in Muslim thought and practice. Yet 10 days ago, we should have been very clear to us that we have far bigger problems than the day and the way and the shape of our ritual performances. Look, the ritual performances of Islam are clearly described in the Quran as instrumental. They are a means and not an end. Look at the verse which I have begun with, which is something very familiar to many of us in this room, and we've heard and we've been reminded again and again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, recite that which has been revealed to you of the book and establish prayer. You know, that fundamental pillar of Islamic religious practice, Umud ad-Din. Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Surely prayer restrains from corruption and vice. It has a purpose beyond its purpose. It is not simply an act of identity formation. Yes, there are benefits for identity. Okay, there are benefits for community. But there are layers to the act which are directed towards more, towards a moral upliftment, towards a spiritual upliftment. Now, when we look at this verse in particular, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar, you know, a very straightforward translation into English is very emphatic. You know, any salat, surely salat repels from corruption and vice. So this typically leads to a question. When we look around at the Muslim world, we don't have to look around at the Muslim world, we can look at ourselves. Okay, and I ask myself, does my salat stop me, restrain me from corruption and vice? I mean, do my acts make a mockery of this verse of the Quran? Does my disposition make a mockery of this verse of the Quran? It's a serious question. Of course, it's not a new question. Some have interpreted the verse and saying that no, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here is that a proper salat, a salat which has consciousness of God, which is aware of its its goals, surely restrains from corruption and surely restrains from vice. Allama Tabatabai says, no, the very nature of salat, the very nature of the salat, it doesn't have to be a proper salat. The very nature of the salat has this function of restraining us, okay, simply through the repetition of the names of God, from saying, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, from repetition. It has an impact, has a potential impact upon us of restraining. But there are other factors in our life which may interrupt that action. So using philosophical language, it's not a complete cause. Right? If you do salat, it doesn't stop corruption and vice, but it can help us restrain. So just as the salat is meant for more than the performance of the act itself, we know that the practice of sawm, that restraint from food and drink and intimacy with the opposite sex in daylight hours, was meant for more than simply hunger and thirst. As the spiritual ethicists have reminded us many, many times, that is the lowest level of the form of sawm, to simply restrain, to make myself hungry, to make myself thirsty. At another level is the level of the restraint of oneself from every immoral act. Still beyond is to restrain my attention from everything other than Allah. As the Quran had stated, the purpose of Sawm was prescribed, لَأَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that we may be conscious of God. Now that consciousness of God, it's that month culminates, it builds. All of us, for sure, at least those who have been blessed with this opportunity of coming to this gathering, adapted their program in that month in different ways. Even those who weren't fasting, there was restraint, right? Maybe because of our age or our health conditions, okay? Or a child is restraining themselves because their meal times have shifted to respect their parents, right? There was so much change. But what have we really taken from it? What has persisted in those gifts of communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In just 10 days, I know for me, for sure, okay? Yeah, there's opportunities which were granted to me in the month of Ramadan, which I haven't managed to continue. And it's only been 10 days. So this is speaking to myself. The month culminates, of course. Some of us are slow starters, some of us are fast starters in engaging with the opportunities of the ibadah of the month. The month culminates in the recitation of the Quran, completion of the Quran for some, in the du'as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And on Eid day itself, there's this remarkable dua, which we recited 7 times or 9 times, which I want to just cite one line from to help us again think about the potential gifts of Eid. The potential gifts of Eid. So in that beautiful dua, which is often recited 7 times or 9 times in the qunuts of Eid, after glorifying the names of God and asking God to make that day of Eid, a source of dignity for Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We asked Allah to include us in every goodness He included Muhammad and Ali Muhammad into. And to protect us from every soul or every evil, every badness, which he protected Muhammad and Ali Muhammad from. Now, what badness did he protect Muhammad and Ali Muhammad from? You know, when we think of the gifts of Eid, okay, what badness did he protect Muhammad and Ali Muhammad from? They experienced wars. They experienced hunger. They experienced continual oppression. They experienced trauma, injustice. You know, what gifts did we ask for? Or what gifts do we seek as a result of Ramadan? Every goodness that Muhammad and Ali Muhammad were granted, what things were they? Wisdom, generosity, compassion, a raising of one's standard. These were the gifts that Muhammad and Ali Muhammad received to become the most beneficial of humankind, to be those whose relationship with Allah was like no other. That was the possibility of Ramadan. And that is a possibility which we should do our utmost to hold on to and to keep as a focus and as orientation for our struggles when we have this liberty to eat and drink and enjoy even during the daylight hours. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وأهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين. You know, when we think about the instrumentality of Sharia practices, you know, they're meant to be a means, they're meant to move us, they're meant to shape us ultimately towards a better, more intimate relationship with God. And that Ramadan was this opportunity for us, you know, to take some of that relationship with us, okay? In our characters, in our actions, and in our relationships with the world, in the way that we interpret the world. It really was a gift, especially when we look around us and the traumatic state of the world. You know, since Eid, of course, we've seen, you know, an Iranian bombing or sending of drones, or the, you know, language here becomes very careful. We have to be very careful with our language. Okay, we've seen an Iranian attack from Iran into Israel. Clearly justified, you know, in line with the UN Charter, in response to the attacking of the embassy in Damascus. Okay, in Syria, at least this is the justification that has been given. And as a proximate justification, it absolutely stands up. We've been hearing this morning and last night's, you know, unconfirmed reports of further responses from Israel. And the way we interpret these ongoings around the world are, of course, very challenging. Very challenging. It goes without saying that although the proximate cause which justified the Iranian attacks on Israel was in retaliation to the embassy in Syria, it goes without saying that the context of Gaza and the unspeakable, continued oppression is the backdrop to this whole story. And how we're interpreting the news, how we're interpreting responses to these situations is, of course, challenging. And not just on the global situation also on the local situation. Now, I wanted to flag up and share some thoughts on an incident which has been in the news for the last 24, 48 hours here in the UK. And to just again pause for us to reflect back on the responses, the most befitting of responses to these situations, because we live in deeply polarizing times. We have to try to break through those polarizing discourses, remembering our moral and spiritual responsibilities. So some of you will have seen reports of a high court judgment here in the UK, of a school, as it's presented in the headlines and the clickbaits, of a school banning ritual prayer. Okay, in response to Muslims seeking to perform salat at lunchtime in a school in Brent. Right? So when I saw these reports, of course, I was deeply concerned, as I'm sure many of you have been. I also am a governor at a school in Loughborough. And I was thinking, what's the precedent of this type of situation? And when we look at the way this incident is being reported in the press, whether it's the Independent, the Guardian, or the Daily Mirror, again, you can see that there is no doubt that Muslims' identity is being used, in political footballing, okay? And at a grassroots level to build and support community identities as well, right? So when you look at these reports, it's deeply concerning. Why can't a school allow somebody to pray at lunchtime? Why can't a school allow somebody to spend 5 minutes just praying Salatul Zuhr? It's deeply concerning. I then happened to push myself a little and download the actual 80-page judgment, of the High Court ruling. And it changed the way I perceived the whole incident. So I want to just share with you some of the details of the judgment and then make some very brief comments. There's lots to think about, very, very seriously, from a fiqh perspective, from a social perspective, from a personal perspective if you have children, or when you're working in the public sector, here in the UK, and prayer is difficult. Lots to think about. I'm not attempting to resolve these issues, all right? But emphasizing that we need careful, considered engagement with these questions, all right? So, the one pupil took a case to the High Court, in response to the school's policy, which was introduced on the back of Shahr Ramadan last year, and they introduced a policy which they describe as the prayer ritual policy, which prohibits the performance of ritual prayer in that school, on their premises. It's a secondary school positioning itself as a secular school. Around 50% of the students are Muslim. All right. The basis of the claim by the Muslim girl who was objecting to this policy in the High Courts were four. All right. That this policy, which prevented prayer, stopped her right to manifest her religion. Was indirectly discriminating against Muslims who manifest their religion in particular ways. All right, and the school had failed to have due regard to encouraging good relationships between Muslims and non-Muslims through this intervention. And that fourthly, because she was excluded for some days, after objecting to this policy, her treatment was unfair. Her particular treatment was unfair. Right? The response of the school, the case of the school, which on the three grounds relating to the policy were all upheld. All right? So I know I'm being a little bit technical here, so forgive me. All right? So the judge basically said that it didn't contravene, the policy doesn't contravene the right to manifest one's religion. It doesn't unfairly, detriment and indiscriminate against Muslims to the extent that it goes against legal provision. All right, and it doesn't impact the relationship between non-Muslims and non-Muslims, right? The judge did rule in her favor in terms of her personal treatment on the way she was excluded, right? The basis for the school, I'm going to summarize briefly, was two. One was that she had the opportunity, and Muslim students have the opportunity to perform qadha salat, to make up their elapsed salat after the time, if they missed it. So if they missed the whole window for Salat al-Zuhr, which was the point of contention, the school argued they can still perform their salat. They can perform Salat al-Qadha when they go home, right? That was basically one of the major elements of their argument. The second was that this girl had chosen, and this family had chosen, to attend a secular school with a specific ethos and system. And any interference with the students' practice of religion was justifiable, all right, in light of the school's ethos and its restrictions. Right. Now, after reading the details of the judgment, my sympathies changed. I think it was a fair judgment. I think it was a fair judgment. At the time of the incident of the school, all right, it's really important we understand what sort of dynamics are going on. So the school is known as, I'm going to try and be brief here and wrap up within the next 5 minutes, okay? The school is known and proudly positions itself as the strictest school in England. It has certain policies, like you can't gather, when you read it, it almost sounds in some ways like a prison or something from a film, But you can also see some of the benefits of that type of system, all right? But of course, it's not a prison because people are choosing to go there, all right? So for example, they can only congregate in groups of 4 in the playground. At lunch times, everybody has to sit on the table. Every table has a teacher, Every table has to engage in specific conversations even during lunch times, all right? So it's a highly managed, highly regulated school with a particular ethos in a fairly small building space, right? Now, what happened was, it was during Shahr Ramadan. Some people have been talking about the performance of prayer. One person started praying. They're strictly restricted into what they can bring into school. So they can only bring designated water bottles. You can't even bring your own colored water bottle into that school. These are established practices. Right? So in Ramadan last year, one girl started praying on her blazer in the 25-minute free time, in the yard. Within a few days, it was 3 girls, 6 girls. There was objections to them praying on their blazers, so they started bringing in musallas, prayer mats. The teachers suddenly started seeing groups of people larger than 4 praying in their praying congregational prayers in their yard. All right, and the teachers said that, look, you're not allowed to bring in prayer mats because you're not allowed to bring anything. You can't even bring a bottle which is not your designated colored bottle. All right. The students are now, if you like, understandably from their perspectives, pushing back. All right. Soon there was 25 people coordinating, bringing in prayer mats. And it completely changed the dynamic of that school. All right. There was some confrontations between students and teachers. Within a week there was 4,000 people writing to the school. All right, online campaigns claiming Islamophobia and a variety of other accusations against specific teachers. Within a further week, there was bomb threats and threats against the life of one of the teachers. All right, it escalated very, very quickly. Muslims acting in an unrestrained, undignified fashion in response to policy. Okay? The school now had an issue of safety. Their own policies and protocols had been disrupted. All right, students were going against their rules. They now had an issue of safety. They had to close the school early before Easter last year. The police had to sweep the school for bombs because there was a bomb threat. Okay, and the governors ratified this policy of the prohibition of public prayer. All right, so a few comments to just wrap up. Right, look, I think it was a reasonable judgment by the judge to uphold the decision of the school. It's a secular school. There was choice to go there. Okay, yet the way the school handled it, all right, and in particular the case of this child, surely has a lot to be desired. Surely has a lot to be desired. Okay, all right. One of the things that we can learn from this is we have to be very careful of jumping on the bandwagon of using Muslim practice for cases of identity. Look, the performance of the salat is meant to stop corruption and vice. Okay, not lead to bomb threats. Okay, yeah, and the disruption, yeah, of a space which is designated as secular. All right, so be very careful how we engage with these institutions. All right, okay, participating in the governance of these institutions becomes so important. Understanding how schools work, how public institutions work, becoming trustees, becoming governors, changing allowing a policy to develop which can safely accommodate, all right, for the different expressions of religions in secular spaces in society. That requires our involvement, active involvement, thinking and practically, not just simply voting and sending an email to a school because somebody said this is Islamophobic and they've banned the performance of prayer. Right? There are, of course, other fiqh considerations. Right? For Shia communities, to be honest with you, there shouldn't have been an issue because for the performance of Salat al-Zuhr, they have all the way until the last moments of the setting of the sun. Right? So typically, even in the winter months, there's the opportunity to pray afterwards. Yes, there is an absolute imperative of maintaining salat for a mature, capable adult. La tutrak as-salat bihal. Okay, is the typical tradition attributed to the words of the Imams. Never leave your salat in any situation. But if you can't perform a ritual prayer because of such limitations, there is, of course, the possibility of praying in unconventional ways. Look, maintaining prayer, it has been described by the Prophet as a dividing line between belief and iman, but not for the sake of the prayer. It is the sake of our moral and spiritual development, to make us more wise, to make us more compassionate, to make us the most beneficial to the societies in which we live. We can only do that with a careful, considered, active engagement with the different models of schooling, of society, of work, which we live in and amongst. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that month of restraint, which we've somehow lost in simply 10 days, or at least me, okay, that month of restraint can actually be a platform for us, okay, to be more wise, to be more compassionate, to contribute more thoughtfully and carefully, okay, with our surroundings, that we can raise our kids in atmospheres where they can engage with society positively. They can fulfill their religious duties, okay, for the sake of their duties and for the betterment of themselves and the betterments of others. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He fills this earth with justice as is being filled with such blatant oppression. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wal-Asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil-haqq وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل وسلم على محمد المصطفى. اللهم صل وسلم على علي المرتضى. اللهم صل وسلم على حسن المجتبى. اللهم صل وسلم على حسين شهيد بكربلاء. اللهم صل وسلم على أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين. الصلاة.